Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm carrying out this video interview of John Rawicz Szczerbo in my capacity as chair of the Secretariat Committee to the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services. I am also, however, the founder of the Transparency Task Force, which provides the Secretariat to the All-Party Parliamentary Group. John, thank you very much for agreeing to have this conversation with me.
Andy, thank you very much indeed for having me.
Welcome. As you know, John, the conversation is being video recorded. The video recording will be placed on the APPG's website and will raise awareness of it through social media and so on. You're carrying out this conversation with me, John, on the basis that you have already provided a written submission to the APPG's call for evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. Could I invite you, please, first of all, John, just to tell us about yourself and outline just briefly to begin with how you came to interact with the Financial Conduct Authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm a graduate from Imperial College, and I left college in 1985 at a time when UK manufacturing was going south, frankly, given the economic realities at the time, and financial services and Big Bang was around the corner. So I was engaged with various financial services companies, applying my skills, essentially problem solving, in the professional services side of the advisory activities. So I was working with accountants, solicitors, tax advisors, and what have you. And raising money and regulation formed part and parcel of the mix in terms of the activities that naturally we were involved with, which include property investment funds, property development activities, member-directed pension schemes, including occupational and personal pension schemes, international pensions, property exempt unit trusts, international annuities. So a whole raft of unregulated, as they're now known, unregulated collective investment schemes. But essentially these are bespoke products or frameworks put together to create a collective investment for a particular commercial property proposition or some other form of proposition. So the vast majority of my work was involved with raising funds for discrete projects, be it regeneration or be it asset investment for individuals or pensions. So this whole unregulated collective investment space, which effectively ring fence and protects investors when run properly, is the space that naturally brings us into regulation. I started my own firm, having consulted with various others, in 16th March 2004, which was subsequently put into administration and then liquidation in December 2016 as a consequence of being caught by the regulator in terms of its conduct in respect of the Connaught Investment Fund, the Connaught Income Fund. And despite our best representations and indeed helping to establish the forerunner of this group, the APPG, in respect to the Connaught Income Fund over a couple of parliaments, I'm very glad to contribute and share our experience. So I started a regulated firm. We raised the best part of £600 million worth of investment principally for regeneration investment, either personally or through pension arrangements to provide liquidity for companies or whatever it happens to be. The FCA saw fit to create a narrative to cover its own particular position in respect of Connaught, which is increasingly unraveling and looking more and more difficult for them going forward. And the latest narrative from Raj Parker, it demonstrates that this is being a completely non-independent process and more involved with trying to protect the blushes or the activities of the FCA. So I'd like to sort of roll into that, if I may. I was co-chair of CIRAG, started it with Mark Clearmont, and we created the representative bodies of the IFAs. And I think Mark has done his submission in respect of how they have been poorly treated in terms of sitting in the shoes of their investors as required by the Financial Ombudsman Service. My involvement is going to be principally in terms of the way that individual firms have been scapegoated. So if we roll back to the very, very beginning, I approached the police in respect of our suspicions about the Connaught Income Fund. I organised for a meeting with my team, with the police and the liquidator, going back to 2013/14, and we also were kept informed about the police's suspicions about what had actually been going on. And the long story short is that the narrative that the FCA have been trying to promote, which is that they didn't know anything about it, or that they were unsure in terms of what their responsibilities were, is in fact complete fabrication. Myself and others had meetings with the FCA. We listened to the narratives that was being pumped by Simone Ferreira and a chap called Christopher Martin, who subsequently became Neil Woodford's compliance director at the FCA, about how UCITS were poisonous, high-risk investments, and essentially the information memorandum that was published by Capita was one that nobody could rely on, despite it satisfying the obligations of the Financial Services and Marketing Act as being fair and not misleading. And for myself and for the attendees of these various meetings, this was completely bizarre. We couldn't understand how the FCA could say in all sincerity that actually here we were seeking to do the right thing and report our suspicions and the belief that this was a criminal enterprise from outset, being effectively pushed back as being not relevant to their inquiries. And, you know, Simone Ferreira and Chris Martin were constantly hiding behind confidentiality. And, you know, I'm inclined to use blah, blah as the phrase, because basically it was this narrative that was presented to the first APPG in government, in Parliament, the convening meeting, and my understanding of what was said, because I've seen the two-page document, is that Simone Ferreira and Linda Woodall were trying to suggest that Toyota and its affiliates did so little regulated activity that basically they were trying to pass off the authorization of Toyota as being not particularly high priority to the FCA, where in fact actually 20% of the business book of Toyota was actually regulated mortgages, and more importantly, the number of people that were effective, something like 260 intermediaries and about 1,200, 1,400 clients, all sophisticated and were aware of what the lending model of Toyota was, which was bridging finance. Had it operated as it was represented to do so, rather like others that were operating the marketplace, it would have been successful. But the more we digged into it, the more it became self-evident that not only did the FCA know what was really going on, essentially they were involved in and not protecting. They were involved in allowing Toyota, a regulated firm, to take monies from redemptions of mortgages, which were due back to clients, and became complicit in the wholesale theft and misappropriation of client funds in the Connaught Income Fund to the extent of £20 odd million initially, when it all went south. George Patelis' submission, which I have read, is an excellent piece of work and details all of the timelines and the disclosures that he made to the FCA, including their reluctance to take the documentation. But it's my assessment that having been caught in the crosshairs, the prime objective for the FCA was to try and create, FCA was try to create a narrative that deflected any responsibility from themselves and indeed any involvement. And this seems to be a common theme in terms of how they have behaved subsequently. So, you know, this Kafkaesque world where the FCA/FSA determines that somehow this was a mis-selling scandal. And when I was with Duff and Phelps in their offices at Portman Square, which was the first meeting that I had with them with a client, with Mr. Bishop, I believe was there, we had two members of the police from the Economics Crimes Unit, and it was abundantly clear that at the end of the meeting, Detective Inspector Richard Ward made the comments to the meeting that one thing that hadn't been discussed was the appalling mis-selling as the reason of losses that was responsible for investors losing money. And this came as a great surprise for everybody involved, because the Connaught Income Fund, A, didn't have significant commissions. I believe it paid 1% per annum. There was no upfront commissions. And you know, the real causes, which was effectively Toyota, under the full view and assistance of the regulator, using the Connaught Income Fund money to repay its creditors and or pay dividends to directors of a company that was insolvent, you know, was the main area of our focus. And the idea that the police had been actively briefed that somehow the IFAs were responsible, we should really have taken a little bit more notice and acted accordingly. But the fact of the matter is that was their narrative. That's how they started to play the particular book that they wanted to play. And you know, through the good offices of your successor group, the All Party Parliamentary Group did invite Mark Stewart to attend an APPG on 30th of December 2016. He created a bit of a stir when he refers to when he was cross-examined, or when he was asked various questions about what the FCA were doing about this particular matter. And you know, he had the temerity to disclose. He had the temerity to suggest that Parliament, in fact, was a kangaroo court. That played, unsurprisingly, very poorly. But you know, if that is the way that the regulator views Parliament, as a kangaroo court, then everything else kind of makes sense in terms of the arrogance with which people have been treated. But anyway, my MP, who was present, was more than a little irritated, and it became quite heated. But one of the good things that did subsequently come out of that was an open door policy between myself, Mark Learmont, George Patelis, and the ability of being able to meet Mark Stewart, which I felt was very helpful. So the first meeting I set out with Mark Stewart, I set out our issues and concerns and suspicions that there were activities which were criminal, and we named individual parties. This was effectively a reflection of our understanding, our collective understanding of the facts at that particular moment in time. So we're going back to 16-17. On the 26th of May 2017, I was invited by Mark Stewart in to meet with him and with Andrew Bailey's executive assistant. I'm afraid I can't remember the chap's name, but I can remember that I arrived about 10 minutes late. I did bring with me some documents, 5 documents, and a couple of packs of docs for Mark Stewart. And he started the meeting by saying we were particularly interested about your comments about criminality. So bear in mind, this is the 26th of May 2017. I laid out our understanding of the facts from our collective experience. I passed him copies of my City of London police report, which objectively, having worked out what had gone on, was probably about 95% correct at the time that I reported it to the City of London police. I gave him a number of other documents which we discussed, and he was looking more and more ill in that particular meeting. I said, you know, when you, Mark, turn around to me and say you're going to have an independent review of all of this stuff, what you're basically saying is that you're going to review what's in front of you. And he had the good grace in the conversation to admit that he knew nothing of the information that I had presented, which showed criminal activity as far as we were concerned. And he looked bluntly puce. And I said, you know, if you're going to be reviewing the documents that you've got, which is a finite amount of documents, and we've got acres of documents detailing our views and all of these sort of issues, you've got a bit of a problem. And it seems to me that if you've only got a very narrow view and you've only been told that these records exist, where in fact in the public domain there's quite a lot of more volumes of information in the public domain, then with respect, any inquiries that you're responsible for means to me that you're going to be set up as a patsy. And he kind of got the point that if he had only been given a full set of cards, the conversation would have been a little different. So I think that was the trigger with Mark Stewart that basically made him think that this needed to be attended to in a different way. Now, it's my contention from the report that I put in, and also the copy of the draft minutes from Capita and what have you, that this effective repayment of creditors and liabilities by a regulated firm to try and pay down the regulated loan book using the fund money, there is a possibility, in my opinion, it's an opinion, that the FCA didn't know what they were doing when it started, and when they woke up and realized from the review of the correspondence that money was being stolen wholesale, they became a willing participant. And by that particular time, they were part of a criminal enterprise and supporting a criminal endeavor and needed to be able to cover it up. So, we look at all of this, we think, what was the strategy that they actually adopted? We tried to report it to the police. They indulged on a charm offensive with Parliament. They actively colluded to answer questions in ways which were ambiguous and or misbrief ministers and members of Parliament. I can remember the Westminster Hall debate shortly after Sajid Javid was promoted. Andrea Leadsom was standing in his shoes, and she was reading out the speech that clearly had been prepared for him, and there were falsehoods in that. In those notes, which could only have come from the Financial Conduct Authority. So we look at all of these activities. We listen to various parties that were invited to Parliament. The APPG got the initial buy-in that Martin Wheatley, who was then Chief Executive of the Financial Conduct Authority, Caroline Wayman, Chief Executive of the Ombudsman Service, and also the Chief Executive of the Financial Services Compensation Scheme would be in attendance in Parliament to outline exactly what their position was in respect of the Connaught Income Fund. I believe that Martin Wheatley declined to come for whatever reason, and it was left to Caroline Wayman and the Financial Services Compensation Scheme to say their piece. Caroline Wayman's narrative was extraordinary to the extent that where she said, and I quote, "Whatever the circumstances, we will find against IFAs." And so that is exactly what happened to complaints and complainants. We did a statistical analysis of all of the public records available from the Financial Ombudsman Service, and there may have been half a dozen or so that were objectively assessed in the start of the process, where complaints were encouraged by the regulator. But the reality of life is that there were standard paragraphs, nonsensical and illogical arguments in the vast majority of the others to find against the IFAs, and the prophetic words of Caroline Wayman, "Whatever the circumstances, we will find against the intermediaries that have got involved." In respect of the failure of my business, I had two clients who were saving the world. They were non-resident tax exiles having sold their yachting business, and they were in port, downloaded in Antigua, downloaded the investment memorandum that had been approved by Capita. They phoned through to my office to confirm they were very interested in placing investment. These were very sophisticated investors, and yet at the time of the complaint, apparently there were mum and pop investors, not multimillionaire tax exiles, which they were, despite the fact that the calls in respect of their conversations were recorded. and actually transcribed from the FCA, and there was absolutely no impossible, that anybody gave them advice because they were phoning in to place an order with one of my colleagues for their pension schemes. Somehow we therefore gave those clients advice, and they were fully compensated according to the arguments, to the tune of 150,000 plus each. We operate raising finance for projects, and so unregulated collective investment schemes or special purpose vehicles or limited liability partnerships, or the whole range of structures that individuals and or trusts and or pension schemes can co-invest with and are ring fenced so that they are protected from commercial contamination elsewhere. We're in a position of looking at all of this sort of stuff. These clients have been very successfully rewarded from investing in all of this space, and for them to claim that they didn't know what they were talking about was a narrative that played into Caroline Wayman's hands. And ultimately, despite our best endeavours of laying out the truth, and I'll come back to that in a minute, they found against our firm. We had clearly notified our insurers. We'd also told them exactly what we were doing in respect to the APPG. We had a great relationship with our insurers, which is a syndicate at Lloyd's. And basically, we used to share intelligence about where things were going wrong and what they needed to look out for to help them with their risk assessment of the market. So, sharing intelligence was a natural feature of our business, despite the facts that our clients were intermediated customers at the time and execution-only customers subsequently, and had always conducted their business on that particular arrangement. We never gave advice. We confirmed it all in writing that this was a decision that they made, etc., etc. And they had been doing that for many years beforehand. We apparently gave advice. So we weren't very happy about the contingent liability that did not make any sense in terms of the arguments of the Financial Ombudsman Service. And the more we peeled back the onion skins in terms of their arguments, the more it became obvious that this was an agenda and there was nothing anybody could do. Now, in that particular phase, you meet other people who have been co-affected. Insurance companies have withdrawn cover so that they'd known it for what it was, which was basically an engine of fraud. And you're in a situation where the regulatory framework was deliberately scapegoating innocent parties. And in respect of my involvement with trying to get this whole right, reporting it to the police, our suspicions and our evidence was such that has been subsequently borne out to be entirely on the money. And in fact, the truth has ended up being considered as being worse than our worst suspicions. And that is basically we were scapegoat for the expense of saving the blushes of the regulator, who knew of criminal activity, in my opinion, were completely complicit in covering it up and were active participants in the theft of client money, which is quite a strong statement to say, but I absolutely believe that to be the case, and scapegoating others. My own particular point is that this behaviour is completely unacceptable. When there was a conversation, or when Martin Wheatley failed to have a conversation more appropriately with Capita in respect of getting any significant redress, and it was left to others to do so, we looked at all the documents and we looked at the public report about Capita. I suspect Capita were not going to be the fall guy for this whole sort of activity. The simple reason being is that they knew that the FCA knew that a regulated firm was receiving instructions to misappropriate clients' funds to pay off creditors. So I think, this was never going to sort of go to court with Capita, as we believed that it should have done, because Capita could turn around to the regulator and say, without being unkind, we were doing your bidding. We were protecting you from having any of this information in the public domain. It's in the public domain, it's in the attachments of my report. People can join up the dots and do whatever they like. So when Caroline Wayman resigned and Norske Delfas was appointed at the chief executive or interim chief executive of the Financial Ombudsman Service, I delivered her a hand delivered letter the same day that she was in office, basically saying I'm delighted that she was appointed to be the chief executive of the Financial Ombudsman Service, because she was the one person who was uniquely qualified in charge of that particular part of the FCA that knew exactly how the cause of losses were created by Connaught. Also, during the time of the liquidation process, the FOS and the FCA were briefed by Duff and Phelps. So Miss Delphas was uniquely qualified to be able to right the deliberate wrongs of Caroline Wayman, fining against IFAs, whatever the circumstances, because she knows, and she knew. Either the FOS was deliberately misbriefed, unlikely because the liquidator was also briefing them, or that they were properly briefed and they did know the true reasons of the losses, and they found against IFAs anyway. So, this is a wrong that needs to be righted, because the consequence for certain people has been worse than mine, but it has been absolutely terrible in terms of economic losses, in terms of loss of reputation, in terms of effect on my family, and was a contributing factor for the stress that led to my wife's illness and subsequent divorce. So, the behaviour of the FCA in terms of trying to shift its responsibilities of criminal activity onto a mis-selling scandal is one which I've put out there in the written report. I believe that Simone Ferreira, Christopher Martin, the estate of Linda Woodall, Nausicaa Delphas, Caroline Wellman, Charles Randall, Andrew Bailey and Martin Wheatley all have a case to answer. I was lucky enough to attend the last in-person meeting of the annual meeting of the Financial Services Financial Conduct Authority in Creswell Street Brewery, and listening to other people who had been affected by regulatory failure. I was particularly struck by one lady who basically held the entire hall in her hand, talking about the fact that she had spoken to the FCA in respect of her LCM investment via her ISAs maybe 4 or 5 times, was given constant assurance that it was protected by the Financial Conduct Authority, and when LCM went bust, basically she was left carrying all of her losses. And I don't know who she was, but she was extremely eloquent, and she laid out the case that made it crystal clear that the FCA really didn't know what the hell they were doing on that one as well. And so we go on. The more you look at the FCA, they have been trying to say with the independent review that there has been significant improvements. People are listening more, they intervene more, and so it goes on. Well, sadly, that doesn't appear to be the case. May 2019, the administration of Lendi, losses 152 million. Funding Secure, October 2019, administration appointed, losses 80 million. Collateral, the FCA knew in February 2018 that were losses of 3.8, and finally that went down for 15 million. Blackmore Bonds, which was 45 warnings from the police. Whistleblowers info, March 2017-18. City of London received 71 reports of fraud from investors, silence from the FCA, losses £46 million. I've seen the emails to Charles Randall, Mark Stewart and Andrew Bailey warning them that people were being completely missold and illegally promoted Blackmore bonds, and they did nothing. Just hold on to that point. OneCoin, UK investors losses over 100 million. London Capital Finance, funnily enough, Dame Elizabeth Gloucester, who did the independent review on that one, didn't get offered a job at the Financial Conduct Authority. 237 million pounds worth of investor losses, and maybe a further £1 billion doomed to property schemes such as the High Street Group. So all post-Connaught, 1.53 billion over the last few years, and that's not actually looking at the information forensically. That's from information readily available in the public domain. And we're here to say that the FCA is fit for purpose. I don't think so. Telegraph on the 13th, money section, 13th of November, talking about unregulated collective investment schemes. Whilst these schemes are unregulated, the FCA has the power to intervene in any case where it believes consumers are at risk of financial harm. It imposed restrictions on the promotion of unregulated schemes in 2014, but declined to state how many times it had taken any action since. The FCA said, "We consider all reports received about potential unregulated collective investment schemes." Oh, really? Same date, when there was an article about the High Street Group, the FCA did not respond to repeated requests from this newspaper. Same date, cryptocurrency FCA warning: investing in crypto assets or investments and lending linked to them generally involves taking very high risk. Consumers invest in these types of products, they should be prepared to lose all of their money. Kind of ironic that they get on a bandwagon but actually can't deal with their own housekeeping that they were responsible for. And if one believes Rawicz Parker, recently appointed independent senior legal counsel of the Financial Conduct Authority 6 months after the so-called independent Connor report, that these guys are doing a much better job and have lessons learned, you end up thinking, do you know what? This really is a complete stitch up by the regulator of the Connaught investment funds. They are clearly not fit for purpose.
John, thank you. I'm going to move on to question number 2. Your response to question number 2 was quite short in the submission, and the question is, what is your interest in or connection with the FCA?
It's actually, my interest in and connection with the FCA is very simple. It's to win full recompense for those who were deliberately scapegoated in the Connaught matter, and see that those that committed criminal offences to be dealt with appropriately under the law. That's my interest.
Thank you. And question number 3, briefly describe the interactions you have personally had with the FCA. Obviously, some of this you've already covered, so please share any further information you'd like to.
I think I've actually covered it off. Basically, I had meetings with Mark Stewart, Andrew Bailey's executive staff, met Simone Ferreira and Christopher Martin on a number of occasions. I met Caroline Wayman once. I've not met Norsk Adelphis, Charles Randall and Andrew Bailey. They've all cowardly refused my invitations to get together. But I have corresponded directly with their offices. Sometimes they've replied, mostly they haven't. As I say, I've attended the annual general meetings with a view to actually asking questions in public and being ignored. But generally, I'm trying to listen to what it is that's being said and influence policy, and try and help politicians understand that this is not a benign or benevolent organisation. It is completely corrupt to the core.
Question number 4, in broad terms, what have your dealings with the FCA been like?
This is an organisation there's nothing other than its survival and self-interest at its core, and it's constantly playing catch up in terms of regulatory scope. And it believes that it's best to be seen to do something rather than actually get to grips with the real issues. And invariably post-event, those lists of failures is a prime example. It has no compunction whatsoever in deliberately misbriefing MPs and ministers. It lies to people. It's overreaching. It's bullying. It's micromanaging. It's anti-competitive, and has acted as a criminal enterprise in respect of scapegoating innocent parties in respect of Connaught. It's pulling completely in a different direction from government policy. This is a semi-intellectual discussion I had with Mark Stewart about the markets being able to raise funds for commercial projects. The FCA trying to close everything down and herding people into what they can't do, despite what the legislation is, to such an extent that their insurers are prejudiced and don't offer cover. And so effectively you've got an organisation which is completely dysfunctional, it's not fit for purpose, and bluntly needs to be replaced. Personally, I've been chewed up, virtually destroyed economically, emotionally abused and spat out by the FCA. Strong words, but in my opinion, a fair reflection of the way the effect of their behaviour on my family is a significant reason for my divorce. And I resent that enormously, because I believe that if you are in a position of trust and you work with your clients honestly, for better, for worse, and you can chat through what it is that you're doing to improve things, people respect you. And the destruction of my business robbed me of those commercial arrangements and the economic benefits that I was enjoying, and being able to look after my family until that particular point in time. My dealings have been more than a little different. I'd expected doing the right thing, exposing criminal activity and theft of clients' money would actually be the right thing to do. There needs to be a complete overhaul, and bluntly, those that have committed criminal activity should be appropriately punished.
Question number 5. Have you experienced situations where interacting with the FCA has been helpful to either yourself or others? And if so, John, please explain what made the interactions helpful.
Okay, well, I think the short answer is no, not a single time. I do believe, however, had I not had the meeting with Mark Stewart in respect to the criminal nature of the Connaught matter, then investors would have been much worse off, because it was unequivocal at the time. It appears to me that regulators are looking for their next well-paid job and do not want to deal with the realities of life, particularly when they lack the faculties to either understand or appreciate the issues until they are too late. They become overwhelmed. They simply just do not have the ability to be able to react appropriately despite their protestations. If you enjoy, bluntly, being trampled over by thugs in hobnail boots and bullies, this is the organisation for you. Generally, the contract staff are clueless, rude or aggressive, and indeed all three. That was my experience in respect to the Connaught Income Fund.
Next question for you, John. What are your thoughts on whether the FCA lacks the powers that it needs, or conversely, that it doesn't make good use of the powers it already has?
If you take the view that I do, that an organisation follows the culture of the leaders of that organisation, the FCA has too much power and even less ability to use them as they were intended. No oversight is a bad error and has led to institutional arrogance and contempt for anyone other than anyone who they find irritating or unhelpful, which includes the APPG being described as a kangaroo court. So I think, you know, if you give people power, that's potentially corrosive. If you give people absolute power without any recourse, that is absolutely corrosive. And that's exactly where we are right now. They do not believe that they're accountable to anybody and get away with anything, simply cover up whatever it is that they've actually created. So, you know, I do not have a good word for the Financial Conduct Authority. I like Mark Stewart, because I think he's fair-minded, but I think his scope is probably clipped. I think Charles Randall leaving is a good thing. I'm not convinced that the current chief executive has got to grips with any of these problems, or indeed may understand some of the issues in terms of what he's walked into. So, you know, does it make good use of the powers it has already in terms of protecting its own self-interest? Absolutely. That's it.
Question 7. Have you experienced any difficulties or shortcomings in your interactions with the FCA?
I think the submission that I've made gives you a very clear flavour of those difficulties or shortcomings.
Number 8. Have you experienced the FCA being reluctant to give clear answers to questions?
I have indeed. And indeed simply lying to MPs in respect, and ministers and anyone else that has the temerity to ask questions they don't want to answer, and to protect their own self-interest. Seen it all, done it, and you know, witnessed it in respect of all of the activities involving Connaught. As far as anything else is concerned, can't make a comment, but as far as this case is concerned, absolutely. This is genuinely a Kafkaesque organisation and not fit for purpose.
Question 9. What is your perception of the culture of the FCA, and what do you think of it?
I'm reading my own notes, actually, as it happens. I forget what I think about it at one level. It does what it wants, when it wants, and acts if its officers are exempt from the law of the land. They act as if they're unimpeachable.
Question number 10. Have you ever complained officially about the FCA? If so, to whom? What happened, and so on?
No, I've always tried to engage them directly. I think that, I've seen that many others who have complained or sought information in front of freedom of information protocols to be treated with contempt, played, abused, or simply ignored and lied to. This is not an organisation that has any respect whatsoever for any outsider. So there's really no point in complaining about them. You might as well try and engage with them. If they don't engage, well, they will engage at some point if one is persistent enough, I guess.
Number 11. What do you think about the possibility of conflict of interest issues at the FCA?
Too many to think about or lay out is how I summarised it in my notes. One of the most egregious conflicts in respect of Connaught is the manner in which the senior FCAO and FOS executives are able to get very high profile and well-rewarded positions in large financial institutions. The kind of perverse reality of regulatory capture by large financial institutions and the avarice and greed of the regulators to be well paid in the real world. I wonder where Charles Randall's going to be going.
Question number 12. Do you believe there should be spot checks by the FCA on regulated and or unregulated entities, perhaps similar to spot checks by VAT inspectors?
No, I think it's a waste of time given that its current operations are seemingly dysfunctional. If it was a well-organised and a well-respected and avocational business, as a support business, as opposed to one which effectively makes diktats, then I think it might be worthwhile. But in the current guise, it's absolutely no value whatsoever.
And number 13, what positives are there about the FCA that you'd like to comment on?
I think the answer that I came up with previously is still fair. The sooner it's disbanded in its current form, the better. That's it.
Question 14. If you could change 3 things about the FCA, what would they be?
I'm not able really to comment on this. It has and is failing to do a good job on so many levels, in my opinion and in experience. It does not get to grip with the issues, indulges in being seen to do something. Lessons learned of being a prime cover-up for their inadequacies and other such cynical behaviour to render the question moot. It's difficult to say anything about the FCA in terms of 3 things that needed to be changed. I'm afraid, there's too many things to mention.
Question number 15. The FCA is undertaking a transformation project. Do you have any comments to make about that?
I'm looking at my notes that I submitted. I said, best of luck if you believe that anything that comes out of that organisation. It is unelected, unaccountable, and feels it can do whatever it wants to whoever it wants, indulge in criminal activity, and believes it can completely get away with it. When questioned by an APPG, it accuses Parliament of being a kangaroo court. I think asking, you may not like this analogy, but actually I put it down in the submission, asking the FCA to undertake a transformation project on its own volition, will be as effective as to ask a crack addict to give up taking his fix whilst completely surrounded by free drugs in his own castle. Or put another way, putting lipstick on a pig. It will prove to be a complete waste of time unless there is utterly a complete change of the organisation. Where is the contribution to consequential losses that people have tried to destroy in a criminal matter?
Final question. Are there any other comments that you'd like to make, John?
I think in life, you should take a moral compass. And I take my moral compass from my grandfather, General Anthony Rawicz Szczerbo, who was a genuine war hero, who was rewarded for his efforts with the Congressional Medal of Honor and an OBE. And he had a very strong sense of what was right and wrong. He and my parents, who have passed, would be turning in their graves were they familiar with the detail of the operations of a so-called regulatory authority that feels it's perfectly satisfactory to scapegoat those that are trying to do the right thing to cover up the fact that incompetence grew to a criminal enterprise, that grew to a cover-up, that grew to a lay off the liabilities to somebody else and effectively pursue the very people that actually had pointed out there was a problem in the first place. And I think that is truly appalling. So, you know, are there any comments that I'd like to make? I think if you're looking at self-hating or people-hating organizations, they share a few notable qualities: centralization, excessive bureaucracy, an inability to resist faddish bandwagons, a tendency to neglect the core audience in their misguided pursuit of nuance. I think that sums it up perfectly. By the way, I quoted that. I'm quoting that from an article that was in the press, and I think that is my position.
John, thank you very much indeed. We've come to the end of the conversation, whereby you have provided verbal testimony supporting your written submission about the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services, exploration into the evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. Just for those that happen to watch this, there will also be supplied on the APPG website the written submission that John produced, which beyond the narrative that John has been providing, also gives copies of various documentation and other supporting evidence, which can be accessed for those that want to do that. So John, once again, thank you very much indeed for spending time with us, giving your evidence today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.